Hello and welcome to TidyX episode 147. TidyX is a screencast where we go through and explain how our code works. My name's Ellis Hughes.
And my name's Patrick Ward. Thanks for checking in with us at TidyX. As always, like and subscribe on that YouTube channel. Drop the comments down below. We do take those comments seriously and often get back to people and turn those into new episodes if you're struggling with an R problem. Also,
Yes.
if you like our work and you enjoy it, you feel like it's been useful to you, we do have a Patreon page. We're always super appreciative of anything that you might like to give. That being said, we're going to jump into today's episode. Last week, we did some Shiny app work where we were showing two different ways to produce outputs from our Shiny app.
Yes.
One was a PDF report, and one was a cool, snappy little screenshot report, which is like uber easy with 2 lines of code. You get an output. Today, we're going to take it a notch further, and we're going to teach our Shiny app to produce an actual R Markdown report. So now, instead of just producing what's on the screen, it's going to actually produce an outputted report that you could then print, take, hand to people, etc.
Or your users can do this too. The intent is like if
Yeah.
you have a standard report that you'd be generating that you might be asked to do on your own sometimes, but it's for your stakeholder, giving them the ability to kind of explore in the Shiny app, but then actually generate a nice, clean report of all the things that they're looking at very easily.
Yep.
We're giving a very simple example here, but all the ideas here you can expand on and make much more complicated. But of course, we're just trying to explain the basic concepts here. So we've got our Shiny app brought up here. As you can see on the left-hand side, we've got a couple different buttons or areas that we can interact with. We've got this select input area where you can click on that and all of a sudden a bunch of, in this situation, these are player IDs from baseball, from the Lawman package. So these are a bunch of different players over time. As you can see, once we click on that, it all of a sudden populates our plots here. Let me make us a little bit smaller. With the various players at bats and on base percentage data, or batting average and on base percentage data. So you can kind of look at that. So I mean, this might be useful during scouting or free agent season when you're trying to figure out who do you want to bring in, how have they performed in the past, how do you want to look at them. So this is like a season average value over time. So you can see the batting average as it goes higher. Usually on base percentage goes up, but maybe if somebody bucks that trend and has a low or a high batting average and low on base percentage, that's probably not ideal, or on base percentage versus at bats. But cool. So now we've generated this. We've picked 5 different players, and I want to be able to give this report to our scouts or whatever. What you can do is you click on render report. And as you can see, this is now, well, I guess you can't see this here, but this is now running an R Markdown report in the background. And now this download report button has become visible. You can click on download report. This downloads it, and it generated this nice PDF for us where it's good. This is the player report based on base percentage. The players included in this report are these fine folk here. And then those same plots that we had generated in our PDF are then printed in here with a nice header and nice section. And so you can, of course, expand on this. This is our Markdown. But the idea is that we're trying to make a more full report, right, than what we showed last week.
Mm-hmm.
The other fun thing is with this is if you've deleted all those, you can't click on render report or download report. And even if you re-add a player, you can't just download report. Now it's a new report. So you have to click on render again, have it re-render the report with that new player, and then you can download it again and update this now to only have yonder in it. So this is a way to add a lot of interactivity to this. So let's go in to explain how exactly did we do this. So let's close and stop the previous running app and get going. Patrick, do you want to get us going on the beginning piece?
Yeah, so obviously we're going to start out by loading a few packages that we're going to require, Tidyverse and Shiny. Obviously, R Markdown we're going to need for that report. shinyjs we're going to require for a few of the helper functions that kind of get us moving here in the direction of rendering that report. And then the Lawman database is where we're going to be grabbing our data from. So we'll load that data in. We've done this a whole bunch of times with this. We've used this data package a ton, but the data is coming from the batting file, the batting database from the Laman data package. We're going to pull in the people's names. We're going to grab some fielding information, create a little mutation here. So we want to know like debut year so that we can just filter out first season and get kind of a suite of more recent players within the data set here. And then calculating on base percentage and batting average. And then we're just going to keep this. The point of this the screencast today isn't the data or the plots, it's the inner workings of all the stuff underneath it. So we're just going to keep a few of the basic categories or the basic columns that we need. So we run that, we've grabbed our data, and now we're ready for our user interface. Again, this user interface is, pretty simple, but it's going to be a fluid page, as pretty much all of our user interfaces are. We start out with this use shinyjs function. This is just there to allow us to get that render report, download report options.
To disable or enable them.
Yeah, yeah. So that exactly. So that the person can't just click on a blank report and have something returned. Obviously, we always have the sidebar layout because we like to put our user-defined groupings on the sidebar and leave the main panel for our plots. So here we're just going to allow the user to select players of interest with the select as input function. So we're just taking the unique names of the player IDs. We're going to let them select multiple players. As we saw in the example, Ellis was able to select as many players as he wanted. He left it at 5, but he could have been 500. It just would have been really busy. At line 51, we put a little horizontal line. We've used BR before, which is breaks, to give some kind of space between the things that are within the sidebar panel. HR is just going to give us a little horizontal line and create kind of some division behind these action buttons. And so the action buttons, as we saw in the example, there was a render report button and there was a download report button. And we're basically telling these things, we're wrapping them in this function that says disabled, because we don't want the user to have this experience where they can click on that and get some blank report. It's not fun. It's kind of a waste of time. So we're protecting them from themselves by saying disable those first. That's the sidebar panel. The main panel, again, this tutorial or screencast isn't about the plots themselves. We're just going to render some silly little plots. You could put all kinds of stuff in here, tables, plots, whatever you want. Just like any R Markdown file, you can throw it in there. Our main panel just consists of those two little XY plots that we saw in the example. And so that's the user interface. And now we're ready to get into the server where kind of the magic happens.
The magic. Yeah. So we define our servers. Servers are a function, right? And they have 2 or 3 inputs. I tend to just default to the 3 because you never know if you're actually going to need session. So the 3 inputs are input, output, and session. The first thing that we do within this server here, they're all reactive, so it's actually technically not in order, but mental model of the order in which things happen. The first thing I'm going to be doing here is producing the data set that is filtered based on the selected players. And so we have this reactive. It's going to require input selected player to be an actual value for it to run. And then we filter the Laman data set player IDs to match those selected players. So now we've been able to take it from the, many hundreds of players down to the 1, 3, 5, 7, 2 players that you've selected. And that assigns it as a reactive data frame, a reactive containing a data frame to DAT players. Next, we're going to define the 2 plots that we generate. Again, we're going to be storing those as reactive because we want to use them in multiple locations in this Shiny app. So storing your results as reactives gives you that more flexibility, I guess would be a way to say that. So we take DAT players. Again, because they're reactives, we have to use the parentheses. We pipe that into a ggplot. We turn them into g_on_point, set the aesthetics to be at bats versus on base percentage. We set the color to be name since we can select multiple players. We do want a way to differentiate them in our actual plots. Make some nice labels and add a theme minimal so that the plots are super clean. Same sort of idea here for batting average versus on base percentage. The only difference is X is batting average. So kind of a similar theme here. We're trying to make things a little abstracted, live in this dynamic sense, and then only grab values, the values that are rendered later on. And then finally, to output them into the viewing portion of the Shiny app, we do output $ AB versus OBP, which is the ID for the first plot, and then batting average versus OBP for the second plot. Because we've already created these plots here in these reactives, we only, within the render plots, only have to reference them. And anytime these values update, they'll update the output for us. Mm-hmm. Next, we have some the logic that is going to enable or disable the buttons for us while we are kind of clicking around here. And so we do that through an observe event. So the observe event is going to be looking at, or this is, I guess, one of the enable disable portions of this. Looks at select player, and it goes, hey, if it's not null, that means they've selected a player. That's great. We are going to enable them to click on render report. So now they can click on render report and have it render the R Markdown report into the downloadable output. If input select player updates at any point and is now null, we actually want to stop them from clicking on anything, because in theory they shouldn't be able to click on anything. So we set disable to all the buttons that we have from that entire stack. So render report button, download rendered report. And we haven't touched on this reactive value yet, but we're also going to set report lock to null as well. So that way that value is gone. And one final option here is ignore null as false. Normally an observe event is not going to get triggered if the value that it's observing is null, because they don't want it to trigger by default on those null values. But in our situation, we are counting on there being a null value to tell us some information. So we need to set that to actually observe it. So ignore null as false means it will update this and trigger it whenever selected player changes even to null. Patrick, do you want to take us through this rendering section?
Yeah, so here we go.
The meat of the...
Yeah, so we're going to render the report once the user clicks on it. So we've done this before. We did this last week. We want to store things in a reactive val. So basically, this is going to help us store the information that's being seen by the user that they want to turn into a report. So again, we use observe event, and we're just checking on that render report button to see if it's been clicked. Okay, so once that event has been triggered, we're setting up this little output directory as a temp file and creating this directory so that we can store the outputs and produce the markdown file that we're interested in having them download later on. So we need to store the data from the Shiny app. Again, we did this last week with the PDF output that we stored, and because we kept everything reactive, like the plots, it's going to be really easy to do that. So we render a new environment. So render environment is going to be a new environment. So anytime they change something on that plot, we're going to create a new environment if they click render. Within that render environment, we're storing our 3 bits of information. We're storing the data, the DAT players, which is the database, or the reactive data frame of them selecting the players of interest. And then we're storing our plots. And again, don't forget the parentheses here at the end of those, because they're reactive. They're going to be changing as someone changes something. Once we've got all that stuff, we're ready to render it. We're going to render, the input is going to be this sample markdown report. It's kind of being saved right there into that folder, into that directory. The output directory here is output directory, which we created up at 132, line 132. So that was our temporary directory that we created. And the environment is this render environment, which is where we stored all the information. And so once we've got all of that stuff happening, we're ready for the report lock, which is the reactive val. This is going to store all the reactive information that we're getting ready to download. And we just store those. Again, we did this last week with the PDF report. We store those as a list of files, and we just plop that stuff into the output directory, and full names equal true. And now that we've allowed the person to click on that render report, and we've done all this stuff. We've stored all the information. If they want to click on the download, they're ready to go. Ellis, take us through the download button.
And do. Yeah, so this is basically saying we've got the output generated. We can enable them to download that. Otherwise, do not let them download that. Now, once, just as we did last week with the download handler, it's the same sort of idea. I've updated it a little bit to handle a few different situations. So last week we'd hard coded the file name to be I think file.pdf or output.pdf or something like that. In this situation, I'm updating it to be based on the base name of reporting lock, which is the rendered report. So it could be PDF, it could be HTML, it could be Word, it could be whatever sort of output you have, it'll respect that sort of download. Next, we have our content. Of course, content is a function that has one argument, file. And this is a kind of a tricky way to get around this the issue of normally in content, the intent of this function here is to be generating the output. But for long running reports and long running pieces that do take a long time to run, I like to put them in that earlier render button or render output button situation up there. So now we already have that file. So we don't need to render it again, right? That'd be silly. And so the way you get around this is you use the file.copy function and you copy the original file and then you copy it to this new location file and you set overwrite to true. I'm not 100% sure this needs to be there. If somebody knows whether it should be or not better than I, please comment down below and maybe explain why it does or does not need to exist. But anyway, this is going to allow us to now download that rendered report that we have. And finally, in order to run the report, we have Shiny app, UI is UI, server is server, and options. We set launch browser to true. That way, when we run our Shiny app, it spins it up in our browser as opposed to in our Studio instance and whatnot, just because I think it looks nicer to kind of interact with. So cool, we've got all these components here. We've got our Shiny app kind of built out. But what does this, what's special about this sample markdown report.rmd? Because there has to be something behind it, right? It had all that information already in there. And so a lot of the magic happens through this render env passing to enver. So what this is doing is it's going to pass all these objects to when this gets rendered to exist in the environment that this R Markdown report is being generated in. So let's take a look at this R Markdown report. And as we can see, it's, looks pretty bog standard for an R Markdown report. But you may notice, so let's kind of step through this and you'll notice something. So we have our YAML title at the very beginning. We have the title of our PDF or our report. We have the output type. In this case, we have PDF document. Of course, you can set it to be whatever you want it to be, HTML document, PDF document, Word document. If you've got other or outputs, if you want it to be rendering out to a Sharingan presentation, you do you. We've got our setup chunk in the beginning, where the only library that we're loading in this situation is ggplot2, because we've already got, because we don't need anything else.
Yeah.
And then we're setting the default options for echo, warning, and message to be false because we just don't want the code to be shown from the R Markdown, and we don't want any warnings or messages to show up in the rest of our output. We have our summary piece, which if you go back to, well, I think I closed the report, but we had our summary piece at the very top, which is explaining which players are there. The way we generate this is we take the unique of the dat players $name and paste it together with a dash and then put new lines behind us. So keen eyes may notice we never actually defined dat players in our Markdown. And the reason this works is because we pass this rendered environment with an object or render env, so it's an environment with dat players already created, and we're passing it into enver here. So what this is doing is it's enabling this the R Markdown report to see all the content we've already generated in our R Markdown that we passed here. So we have the plots, the dat players already available for our Markdown report, so we don't have to rerun it again. So we can cat that out. We can print out the two plots that we've already got with nice formatting. And that's how it works. That's kind of the magic,
Mhm.
how we're sharing things back and forth in order to simplify the running, the rendering, and speed that up, and just make sure it's consistent between what our users are seeing in our Shiny app, as well as the rendered report that we're going to be giving them at the very end.
Mhm.
So with that, we've got our report all ready to run. So let's take another look at, now that we understand how everything works, take another look at this final the Shiny app here. So as you can see, as we initialized, render report and download report are unable to be clicked on once you select a couple players. So let's jump around here. It's going to update the plots there with the various players. You can click render report, and we're gonna slide this over to the left here. You can see in the background it was rendering that report for us. We now have download report able to be clicked. We got our PDF, and there you go.
There
One
you
of the
go.
other really cool things that you can do, and I'm going a little off script here, is you can update this on the fly. So we've updated our sample report RMD. We're going to go back to our Shiny app here. Click on render report again. It's now running again in the background. You can see the stuff going on back here. We're going to click on download report, and now it's HTML. So I just wanted to show that, like, you can, because of the way that we set it up, you can have a variety of different types of reports able to be downloaded by your user depending on their needs. And so that's all I have to say
Yeah, no, that's pretty
about
awesome. There we go.
about using Shiny to render your R Markdown reports to hold on to the contents from your Shiny app in a nice way.
Yep.
So with that, I
Awesome.
guess we'll call episode 147, Patrick, unless you've got something else to add.
No, nothing else to add. Pretty sweet.
All right. Thank you. As always, my name's Ellis Hughes, and you can find me on the various social media sites at Ellis_Hughes.
My name's Patrick Ward. You can find me on Twitter at OSPPatrick, at tidy_explained is the handle for the TidyX screencast. Tidy.explained@gmail.com is where you can email us. But most importantly is liking and subscribing on the YouTube channel, and then hitting us up with your questions and comments there, because that is the easiest place for us to get back to you. And as always, if you enjoyed our work, we enjoy doing it, and you'd like to support us, we appreciate it. And we do have a Patreon page, and that's always awesome and open, and we are gracious for anything that you may give.
Thank you all so much. Keep on exploring your world.